It's a pleasure to be joining you all today. My heart's in New Zealand. Unfortunately, my body is not here in California, and it would be much missed. And I hope to be down there in person next time. Before we get started, for those of you that may not know me in the background of the company, I wanted to share a little bit of our journey and a little bit about the inspiration for this talk. So, like most good Asian kids growing up, I like giant robots. So I grew up with a series called Gundam that was created kind of in the late 70s, early 80s. And despite the really poor animation, it really inspired my imagination for innovation and pushing the boundaries of what is possible in this world. And earlier this year, I had the pleasure of taking my 6-year-old son Caleb to Japan, and I got to see my childhood dreams kind of come alive in the form of a six-story robot that could actually move and talk. And while this was a great father-son bonding moment, I couldn't help but draw inspiration from what it took to translate an idea into reality as reflective of what most of us as entrepreneurs go through on a journey to try to turn innovation into great companies. And today I'm hoping to tell you a little bit about the winding journey of ZeaKal and how we started with great science, but how we really had to innovate beyond innovation in order to make this successful and change the way that we're really feeding and feeling the world. ZeaKal, we have our roots actually in New Zealand. We started as a research concept up on the North Island in a small town called Palmerston North. And at that time, I was a young CEO, probably in my late 20s, and I felt like I was the luckiest guy in the world. I had stumbled upon a photosynthesis technology, and we were changing the way that plants were fixing carbon and capturing sunlight. And so, as a 28-year-old, I thought, gosh, this is going to be a layup. Photosynthesis, after all, was the core of all plant science research. It was a $10 billion target, and I was just lucky enough to lead the science innovation, and kind of had just stumbled upon it by accident, as we call science by serendipity. And now at 41, I realize how naive it was of me to think that back in my late 20s, because even though the science has remained the same, the road has been long and winding, and what it took to be successful beyond the science really surprised me. And today, I kind of want to share 3 lessons that I've learned from my journey that may be useful for you all. The first lesson I kind of learned was to know thyself, you really have to know thy customer first. So, as a venture capitalist, when we started building ZCal, my customer base was actually the large C companies. I had seen so much many great innovations kind of be built up as startups, ultimately to be acquired by larger companies, life sciences, med devices, tech, etc. All follow this model. And I thought, well, why wouldn't agriculture be any different? And the investors that had invested in me kind of asked the same question. Ultimately, what is our exit strategy? So initially, when we set out to do this, it was to build a very capital light innovation model where we could deliver great science, great data, great IP, hopefully to the large acquirers. And therefore, the seed companies, the seed majors, the Bayers and Cortevas of the world were our logical customers. But ultimately, what we discovered was that we had been thinking about our business completely wrong because our photosynthesis technology was not actually changing the seed in the way that these seed companies were selling their products. We were increasing the carbon capture of several of the world's most important row crops, soybeans being the most notable one. And we were ultimately changing that nutritional density. We were changing the way soybeans were producing protein and oil, and this was ultimately benefiting consumers and customers of soybeans way further down the supply chain than we ever thought. And it was this realization a few years ago that what we had was actually not the seed itself. We were not actually on a journey to become the next great seed company. What we were selling was nutritional density, improved sustainability, and food security to a world that was demanding a better form of agriculture. And the seed companies that we were trying to market to this whole time were actually in no better of a position to ultimately realize this value than we were. So it was this initial change in thinking that allowed us to reposition ourselves and really allowed the business model and ZCal to thrive after about a 10-year innovation journey. So when we started rethinking about who we were along the supply chain, that's when things really started to change for us. We signed multiple partnerships with some of the largest players in the world that really value the science that we were creating. We were changing the position of the grower because ultimately the farmer was no longer our customer. We were not trying to extract value from that farmer base. We were not trying to extract margin. We were trying to change that farmer into a partner that could help us realize the real value of our innovation. And through that journey, a lot of really great things started happening beyond the commercial success of seeing our product get closer to market. We ended up creating a better food system where we were working with growers to increase their incomes. We were diversifying the sources of return on farm away from purely yield in a commodity based system that was racing to the bottom. We were compressing the supply chain with the new partnerships we were forming that made agriculture more responsive, more resilient to consumer demands at a time when previously agriculture was really a behemoth that was based on volume. So that kind of reimagining of our role on the supply chain and how we really fit with everybody else, although nothing had changed physically, that reimagination really led to the development and the realization of the value of our technology in a way that we never thought of. So for all the entrepreneurs out there, the first thing to do is to really think about, who your customer really is in order to properly identify the value of what your company really needs to become. The second lesson I kind of took away was really in reaction to a lot of what my investors were telling me, especially those venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. Many of you who have raised money have probably heard the word disruption. Investors love that word because it often means that you are developing something so different, so novel, hopefully highly profitable, but ultimately will change an industry. What I realized about agriculture is that the word disruption really isn't the best definition of what we should be working on. It works great when you're talking about getting users for a new social media app. Are you disrupting the way that we consume information? Are you disrupting the way that we hail a taxi and a cab? But food has a moral imperative. Without food, we cannot feed the world. We do not have the basis for that. Disruption in our industry usually comes with a negative because if we disrupt the supply chains and the system, even to improve it, ultimately the consequences are quite real. And what I realized a few years ago as we went on this journey was that in agriculture, I would rather focus on a strategy of harmonization over disruption. What that means is reimagining the infrastructure we have, reimagining the partnerships and the roles of everybody along the supply chain in order to truly capture the value of innovation. And as a startup, this is particularly important as well because agriculture often does not follow the life cycles and the timing of typical technology companies. We often do not have the benefit of achieving proof of concept or building significant growth within 12 to 24 months. The biology and the timeline simply do not allow us to do that. But when you think about harmonization and as a way of building these resilient partnerships, as a new company, as a startup, as an emerging technology, you're going to find that you're going to have a lot more longevity in this industry, which is absolutely critical for startups. Agriculture is very, very long. It's difficult and can often be capital heavy. So as companies, we have to find ways to innovate at a fraction of the cost, especially in today's environment. And what we realize is that harmonization allows you to build that scale, build that adoption with partners that are here to support you in ways with resources that startups simply don't have. And as a great example of how we've done this at ZeaKal is that when we started off, we tried to build our innovation model with harmonization of public and private partnerships. We had great roots in science foundations out in New Zealand with AgResearch as one of our co-founders. And we really took that model of taking basic research funding and extrapolated that with all of the best research organizations in the world. We tried to find the best in class of universities and other organizations that had a best in class that allowed them to kind of become the service providers and the partners that will allow us to innovate. And as our science matured, we started thinking about how can our capital light innovation model really translate into capital light harmonized commercialization model. And that ultimately led ZeaKal to build the partnerships that today have given us the ability to produce our own seed, to develop these technologies through regulatory, and create a customer base that's readily able to adopt this with solutions that ultimately make our technology successful in the hands of growers. So, as you think about how you innovate, do not think about innovation as who can raise the most money or growth at all costs. But think about where you play and where you can really get that supply chain to support you and to make sure that they're covering the risks so you're not trying to do everything by yourself. Because it's hard enough as a startup to just focus on what you do rather than focus on everything else that you may not have the expertise. And the final lesson, I think, is one that is a little bit cliche and may seem very obvious to everyone here. And it's that as great as science is, as great as innovation is, and although every journey often starts and ends with great science, what happens in the middle usually requires people and the teams that build it. So I'm sure a lot of you may have heard that investors often would like to take a plus team with a B technology rather than A technology with a B plus team. And that's absolutely true. But I think when we think about how we build teams, I've had a little bit of a different experience than probably a lot of what others have. When we were building this team, I did not look for the most number of PhDs, Ivy League education. We did not try to stack this company at the beginning with 200 employees and the nicest labs and the best infrastructure. What I realized about startups is that the qualities that you want in team members really come down to three things: courage, competency, and compassion. So I'll start with courage as the first part of it, because anyone that sets out on this journey is really looking to do something different and to change something. And the conviction that you need to really make yourself sane, because most startups have less than 1% chance of success, is really that courage aspect of it. And that courage is really what it takes to really bring others to you, to inspire that change that you want to see for a better tomorrow. And that's something that's really unique, I think, when you're in the position of a young startup, to be able to have that courage that's often hard to find in larger organizations. You don't have the constraints, you don't have the quarterly reports, you don't have the shareholders that are breathing down your neck for the profitability of this year or even next month. What that means is that you're in a position to make really bold decisions. And those decisions, that charisma, is what's going to attract the right types of partnerships around the table in order for you to make your vision a reality. And so many times in kind of, I will say, backdoor, conversations with the partners that we formed, I'm often surprised at, how there's so much talent around the world at all these companies, but often they cannot make decisions and have the nimbleness that startups can. So in that unique position, truly capture it, truly make the bold, inspirational choices. And I find that the rest of the world will usually follow because courage is the most attractive and inspirational thing. The second one is competency, which may seem very, very obvious. Obviously, you want the most competent team out there. But what I realized is that competency within a startup is often very different than competency in any other organization. In startups, you often don't have large teams. You're not managing, a team of 20, 30 people. It's often that you're by yourself, having to do it all. So what I've learned over my journey is the people that I find that really fit in well with the startup culture are those people that can be that army of one. They're your dishwashers while also being your head of regulatory, while also being to figure out the hardest science of the world. There are people that are open to learning because when I started out, I didn't have a science background, but I had to take on the humility of learning the science. And the scientists on my team had the humility to really learn the business development and to understand how the business works. And when you have a team that is fully competent and each person can bring that unique skill set, that multidisciplinary skill set, you often result in a culture within the company that is more open and transparent. You end up working together. You take out the politics of trying to climb up in an organization where everyone is struggling to keep the company alive. And that camaraderie and that binding on competency is what makes startups successful. So a lot of times as a new startup, it can be very intimidating when you look at your competitors and you look at the industry leaders. After all, they have infrastructure, they have talent, they have capital that you might not have. All that will come in time, but the people that you start out with, a great co-founder, a great first hire that can do everything, often that is worth its weight in gold and cannot be replicated no matter how much money, how much capital, or how much infrastructure you build. The last lesson I think is one where it's important for agriculture, especially. We can control some of the most powerful technologies in the world. And it's at the core of everything that we do across every society, which is the production of food. So, as all of you in the audience, as you're thinking about the next great innovation or the next company you might build, and hopefully one day you'll be on the podium of success and looking back. But at that point, I think the most important quality of a team and the most important quality that that team ultimately becomes a company is compassion. Food is ultimately the basis of every nation or every state and every community. I truly believe that every community starts at the dinner table and you gather around talking about your hopes, your dreams, your fears. And what binds us really in that shared common culture is how we consume food, how we feed our families. It's the most basic of necessities. And agriculture often is not the most compassionate of industries, despite that moral purpose that we all have. It is a very large industry. It is often characterized by razor thin margins that make us very competitive with each other. Often, what should be friends ends up as enemies, what should be partners ends up as competitors. And an industry where, as we get larger and larger, it is resistant to change. Inertia is there. And so, if the world is really demanding a better food system, if we really want the social license to be able to commercialize great and powerful technologies, you cannot separate compassion from that picture. You have to make sure that as you think about your shareholders, you go beyond that and think about all the stakeholders of food, which is every citizen of the world. So, how you choose to wield that technology, how you choose to be successful, will ultimately be made up with the character of your team and the culture that the company represents. So, as you're building the next great ag startup or the next great innovation, and you think about the tribe and the village that you want to build around you and the crew that's going to help you do it, keep those three C's in mind of courage, competency, and compassion. And I wish you the best of this journey as you go forward. I wish I was there in New Zealand with you all. It looks like a great audience. And again, thank you to everyone for creating the opportunity for me to speak. And I hope there's a few lessons in here as a takeaway for you guys as you move forward. Thank you all.